Free for all, Arya watched the commotion from the balcony of her chamber on the last floor in one of the Emerald Towers in Illyra. She was there with her royal retinue to take part in that year's annual games. Also, it was a good opportunity for the leaders to finally sign the agreement on the new legal code regarding the magical practices throughout Alagaesia. Down below, King Oric and his own retinue paraded among curious citizens who waved and greeted the dwarves on their arrival. She smiled. Arya liked Oric. They were incredibly different, but Arya felt that with Oric she could talk freely, with no concerns of being misinterpreted, although she knew she would be. And when that was the case, he was reasonable enough to listen to her explanations, or to leave it behind them. The other way around was also true, after many years of camaraderie. His quarrel with Eragon almost 10 years before was a good example of such flexibility, if the dwarves could ever be claimed to have that quality. He exposed his predicament and listened when a solution was presented. Of course, he became enraged and cut ties with his foster brother, but once he was convinced of a better alternative, Oric was reasonable enough to change his mind. In her opinion, that was how all arguments should be, even if anger took the best of her sometimes as well, and flexibility was the last thing on her mind. Arya stepped away from the balcony and entered her room. She stood in front of the tall mirror, placed on the corner. Her reflection appeared fair and regal. She inspected herself. A light blue formal dress clothed her slender torso down to her ankles. It looked flattering on her, like it was sewed directly on her body, respecting her curves and measurements. A mantle hung over her back, much lighter than the one borne by her mother, made of swan feathers. Hers was a sober cut of green velvet. The bright diadem over her brow completed the look. She was quite an image, admired by all, no exceptions, and she knew it. Men would frequently follow her steps with a hungry stare. It was a habit for her to ignore it completely, but it hadn't always been like that. In her early years with the Varden, she would avoid being seen in public. Then, she received an advice that changed everything for her. A human middle-aged woman that took shelter among the Varden once told her that Arya had a big advantage in life. She was capable of making men do or say whatever she wanted them to. All it was needed was for her to carry herself around proudly and use the attention against them. Arya understood what kind of business that woman conducted and judged her for that. How could she sell herself that way? How could she use her body as instrument of other people's pleasure at the same time she would manipulate them to give her information she could sell later? Arya was disgusted by the lows the human race was willing to reach. She would never do something like that. Arya gathered all her politeness and thanked the woman for the advice, but refused to act so manipulatively. The old beauty smiled kindly, took Arya's hand between hers and said in a loving voice, "Then you must ignore them, my darling. Live your life like nobody's watching. One thing you should never do, though, is to hide from the stares, because then you will be erasing your own existence. And you have quite the existence." From that moment, Arya would stride among people with her chin up, trying to keep an unaltered expression of stoicism. The stares still followed her, but it was easier to keep herself from noticing it with time. All it took was practice. A bitter grin changed her expressionless feature while watching her own stunning figure. Even then, looking like the live painting of perfection, she was sure her mother would have a malicious comment to give, a correction to make, a strand of hair out of place, or a wrinkle on her mantle. Maybe even the wrong shade on her lips or piece of jewelry around her wrists. She was always unfit, always inadequate by her mother's eyes. With a sigh, Arya started the spell on the right time that would connect her mirror to the one in Fel Thindare. The surface of the mirror quivered and Eragon's image appeared. He locked eyes with her and failed to greet her first. There it was, the stare. She decided to give him time to come to himself, as she would usually do to everyone else. But he wasn't like everyone else, was he? No, his eyes didn't normally travel throughout her body, lingering on the most inappropriate spots, although she noticed he was trying his best to keep himself respectful of her. In reality, his eyes were continually greeting hers, beaming in longing. She realized then that his stare was never like the others, even if it traveled downward now and then, and that was the reason she couldn't keep him away from her life for too long, for she craved that kind of attention. His attention. When he told her about Elva and how he had designated the girl to be her protector, she became a furious force. She was close to smashing the scrying mirror just to tear off the image of him, to see him in pieces. How bold of him to assume she was defenseless and incapable of taking care of herself. Would he always try to shield her from harm, even though she didn't need protection? Didn't he remember who she was? Arya thought he would know her better by then. Her self-control won the battle in the end, and all she had done was to give him a death stare and end the spell on the mirror. It took a lot of reasoning from Fernan for her to get in contact with him the next day and hear what he had to say. His narrative about the elf, the merchant, and the red-headed woman did nothing to placate her fury. On the contrary, she cursed him for mixing with those individuals that were far more experienced in manipulating people than him. His last words, on the other hand, spoken in a suffering voice, swept her off her feet. "I would do anything," he said. She blinked and tried to understand what he had said. Anything for what? To protect her, well, clearly he could do more, and that was only another reason for anger, except for coming back home. Her voice was harsh and bitter. He flinched like he had been slapped in the face. "I tried, but the oath." Eragon was obviously hurt. In Arya's head a cord snapped. She had promised herself she wouldn't hurt him anymore, but there she was, demanding his return even though she knew it caused him pain to think about it. What about the oath? "I cannot relinquish my duty here to go to you, for it would mean I would be breaking the rider's oath. Umaroth pointed out to me that I would be acting on self-indulgence if I travelled west, and it isn't allowed." Eragon was sad, and she hated herself. Arya wasn't ignorant about the oath since she took it herself in the presence of the two Eldenari Eragon had left in Elismera before leaving forever. She knew how binding it could be, so she started to understand the extension of his affliction. Her anger toward him became an anger toward the entire situation. Death threats against her, someone clearly trying to manipulate him, his bindings attaching him to Fel Thindore and her own duty keeping her in Elismera. And now Elva. Arya brought 2 fingers on her lips and saluted him first. Eragon smiled and shook his head, but completed the elven greetings accordingly. "Will you ever let me start? You are too slow, rider." She joked and returned his smile. Eragon put his palm on his chest and bowed. "You are right, it's my fault." "Pardon me, my queen." His tone was playful and filled her heart with nostalgia. She missed the days they had spent together 9 years before. "You know I am not your queen, do you not?" It wasn't a reprimand, because she enjoyed the words coming out of his mouth, so familiar and so close to her heart. She simply meant he wasn't her subject. Her insinuation caused him to look at her in a fiery, meaningful manner, the corners of his mouth curving slightly upward. "Are you sure you are not?" His words came out in a raspy voice. Her heart jumped inside her chest. Eragon had learned with time how to play with her emotions in a way that Arya herself couldn't understand completely. It was a look, a smirk, a hand through his hair or a scratch on his beard. Little details that could unbalance her, just like she did with her admirers. Just like she would do to him. Now it was his turn to shake her. The only difference between them was that she almost never intended to do it on purpose. She let out a heavy breath and raised her chin in defiance, trying to conceal her reaction to his provoking game. "You are not my subject." "You are right, Your Majesty." "I will let another one call you like that then." It was a challenge for Arya to decipher if he was only teasing her or not by the way he mentioned Deathada in between the lines. By the possibility of being the second case, it caused her an unexpected heartache. Of the heated discussion with her counselor 4 years before, the fact that she hated how Deathada called her my queen was the only thing he was told about. Arya would question herself on why she had spoken of it with him. Maybe it was a silent plead for him to take on the habit instead of Deathada, if she enjoyed the words rolling out from his lips so much. Nevertheless, it was an impulse to share that part of herself so hidden from him. It was so unlike her to act that way. Oftentimes, he would tease her about it. Eragon might have noticed her discomfort, for his typical gentle smile made an appearance combined with his equally typical warm eyes. It was only a jest. "You are my queen." So vainly satisfied with his devotion, she tipped her head and smiled back at him. "I will allow it." His loud laugh echoed in the eyrie and in her chamber too. "Always in command, aren't you, Arya? You know me well." He really did. No one else apart from Fernan could say that. Not her people, not her friends, especially not the council. They all had preconceived ideas of her, but no one could actually get it all right the way he did. He had been wrong about her in the past on the early moments of their friendship, but it was only because he wasn't paying enough attention. Now that she could barely keep herself from reacting to his gaze, it was easy for him to read her. She was practically bare in front of him. Doubting his knowledge of her was only a reflex, urged by moments of discontentment, caused mainly by his rash decisions or disregard for prudence. Although she had noticed, those moments became rarer with time. Accusing him of not knowing her when he placed Elva in Elismera to be her shadow was a superficial analysis of the situation. He knew her well and probably had feared her reaction, but as he had said himself, he would do anything for her. He breathed heavily, and the seconds passed without them saying a word. They just looked into each other's eyes. How long would it be until he broke the silence? She couldn't know. She was certain of one thing, though. Time can only move forward. Losing a battle against his better judgment, Arya watched his eyes sliding over her dazzling figure. She wouldn't be humble to herself. It was dazzling, she knew it. "I know this is an official scrying session, but I must say, Arya," he swallowed something painful in his throat. "I miss you terribly." His eyes grew dim. He said something, but meant a lot more, she was sure of it, for her mind would fantasize about him as well. Arya stepped a bit closer. "And you. I don't think I have ever felt this way before about anyone else." And again, an impulse made her open up to him. Her pain only aggravated his. She could tell he had darkness in his eyes. Arya forced a smile and held a conciliating expression. "Only a year now." He nodded and tried to better his mood by unlocking himself from her look. "Let's get to the point of this session," Eragon said as he played with a strand of his beard on his chin. "The agreement. Do you know when Nasuada wishes to hold the meeting about it?" "Nasuada wishes to wait for King Orin to be present. The problem is, he refuses to come to Illyra." She watched as his eyes widened in surprise. "Is it a boycott?" "I believe it is. Orin is afraid of the power your plan of education would bring to the kingdom. At least that's what we take from his refusal, because his official reason not to come is an indisposition of Queen Manuela. But if he signs the agreement, then he will have the same benefits. His people will receive the same education as Nasuada's magicians." Murtagh assured me that he made it clear to the king that all the territories would be treated the same, so I don't understand. Eragon seemed distressed. It was as the king had doubted the rider's competency in forming well-taught minds. For Eragon, Orin's actions were personal. He doesn't see it that way, since his kingdom is smaller, less populated. It would create a lesser force. Orin can be competitive. A bitter frown took Eragon's expression, which caused Arya to think that he would punch the king's face if they were in the same room. "Arya, as a queen, I can't tell you what to do, but as a rider, you must pressure Nasuada into signing the agreement. Murtagh is carrying the negotiations since the beginning, almost a decade ago, but your voice resonates louder than any other. Trust me, Eragon. You have my support as the queen and the rider, she said with confidence, which made him sit back in his chair. Right. Thank you. What do you suggest we do? A deadline could help, he shrugged. We cannot drag this any longer. If Nasuada proposes a final date for Orin to make up his mind, let's say a month, then he has to sign it or exclude Serda from the agreement. One way or another, the matter will be settled. Nasuada fears a conflict. He should be the one fearing anything. Eragon said with coldness, would you order the riders to fight in a way against Serda? Arya was surprised with his feral stance about the Serdan king. I can't do that, but the riders would have to mediate any kind of conflict, you know this. If they determine that Orin is the cause for such disagreement, then the Order would have to hold him accountable. It's our duty, Arya nodded and concluded. He better sign the agreement or be quiet about it. That's my opinion as well. They were interrupted by a knock on Arya's door that she quickly identified by touching the visitor's mind as being Elva waiting for her to go join the others for the festivities. The strange girl's company has become a constant in Arya's life. She would rarely walk around Elismera without Elva's steps following her own. They were quiet and vigilant companions for each other. Arya realized that Elva would keep her witty remarks for herself and would rarely comment on one's affliction. It happened only a handful of times, and once it was a pain that Arya was feeling on her back that she couldn't figure out the source, and it made her get up from her chair like an elderly human and walk with cautious not to start an attack of pain. A simple spell to help with the pain was only a temporary fix. She had yet to cure the cause. After seeing the queen roaming around the palace in a curved posture, Elva finally pointed out a knotted muscle on her lower back that passed unnoticed, and that knowledge helped Arya to fix what was wrong. The occurrence was mundane, but it was the perfect example of how Elva treated her power, discreetly, silently, even cruelly when she wished it to be a weapon. Elva is here. Should I tell her to wait? No, you may go, Arya smirked. Who's in command now? Eragon laughed and bid her farewell with his fingers pressed on his lips. Luxurious as usual, the ball in Queen Nasuada's castle was a clear display of wealth. With time, the celebrations around the games became more and more selected to the rich and powerful of Alagaesia. Aristocrats of all races and territories were there, parading their intricate outfits and jewelry. Arya despised such waste of resources when there were people still living in misery inside their borders. Not only her advisors were invited by the human queen, but other elven ladies and lords, princes and princesses were there as well. Some of them relished in the luxury of the place, but most felt as uncomfortable as Arya. They were stepping on a different kind forest. A dangerous one. Besides the aristocrats, the guests also included the riders and their dragons, being Murtagh and Thorn the highest authorities among them. The youngest followed their lead and behaved as they instructed. Fernan and Arya were the only ones above their command, which made the pair feel quite vain for having the special treatment. Arya watched the dancers glide around the hall from Nasuada's table. Along with the two queens, Oric, Nar-Gajvog and Grimmer Halfpaw with their mates kept a polite and friendly conversation. The human queen turned to Arya with curious eyes. Were you scrying with Eragon earlier? Nasuada asked in a low voice just for Arya's ears to pick up. I was. He exposed his frustration about the agreement taking too long to be signed. Arya was frustrated as well, but she knew that Nasuada would take his opinion in consideration in a way she wouldn't do with anyone else. I imagined he would. He suggested a definitive solution. She started and watched as Nasuada looked at her with interested eyes. That you give Orin a deadline to come to Illyra and sign the agreement. After that, he will be excluded from the document. An ultimatum, she laughed and shook her head. Eragon's solution is to give the king of Serda an ultimatum, Arya smiled. I believe he was being moderate. His opinion about Orin is harsher than that. Good thing he's away, then, for I fear he would have started a war by now. Arya nodded to humour the queen, but in all honesty, she agreed with Eragon. She too wished to punch the king in the face and run her army over his own. Caution would tell her otherwise. And no, she would never be glad Eragon was away. Is Eragon that wrong? If Orin fears your might if the magicians get proper education, then why not use this fear to put him in his place? He is purposely stalling the agreement. He's not interested in keeping the peace. Nasuada seemed surprised and even amused. Are you agreeing with Eragon? How curious. Didn't she usually agree with him? Why was Nasuada so surprised you two agree only after almost going for each other's throats? Fernan said, I believed we just had a reasonable conversation about this matter earlier and agreed just fine on this course of action. She could sense Fernan's amusement through their bond. She looked at him from across the hall where he stood in the company of Runela and Vance. Rainier and Avelina, both already acting as official riders by then, were turning heads as they swirled around the. Arya paid attention to Rainier, for it was the first time she had seen him in 10 years. Normally, a recently graduated rider would go to Elismera in order to request a sword from Runan, giving Arya the opportunity to meet with them before sending dragon and rider to their assignments. But he didn't come to her. Instead, he flew from the academy directly to Carver Hall. When she questioned Eragon about it, he stated that Rainier already had an assignment along with Avelina, and he also had a rider sword. He didn't go into further details, and she didn't care enough to ask, but watching Rainier displaying that sword to the whole room the sea, she considered that Eragon had hidden a big piece of information from her. Is that Brissinger? She asked in confusion. It seems like it. Yes, it's definitely Brissinger, Fernan said after Rainier passed right in front of him. I don't understand. Why would Eragon Gee? Arya. Are you all right? Nasuada noticed her puzzlement and alternated her look from the elf to the young pair of riders. Yes. I was just in a conversation with Fernan. She looked at the queen. I do agree with Eragon, believe it or not. It's a good plan. Honest, straightforward. Nasuada took a sip of her wine and said, Good. My messenger must be arriving in Serda at this very moment, carrying a letter with my ultimatum. Arya gasped. How did she manage to be always 2 steps ahead? Nasuada really was a true stateswoman, with her cunning and clever mind. Ajihad would be proud, so I am not the only one who agrees with Eragon after all. How curious. She laughed again. They rested the subject, so Arya could turn to face the dancers again. Curious didn't even start to describe the fact that Rainier was the new carrier of Brissinger, the legendary sword, forged by the hands of its original owner and war hero Eragon Bromson, the Shadeslayer. Not curious at all. It was disturbing. One more indication that not only Eragon had given up the fight, but knew what no one else knew, whatever that was. Arya felt exhausted all of a sudden, like a burden too heavy for her had fallen on her lean shoulders. She excused herself and walked back to her chamber, leaving Fernan to compensate for her absence. Elva was also left behind, and if she felt Arya's discomfort, she didn't express it or try to ease it. The first drops of rain started to fall on the grounds of Illyra. Arya was lying on her bed reflecting on her discoveries, but rushed to the balcony so she could feel the fresh water on her face and smell the soft aroma of wet dirt and rain. She took a deep breath to fill her lungs with the nostalgic perfume as her bare arms were raised to the sky. 1 year now. Only 1 year.